What I'm going to do is start talking about irrigation design to start with. I won't go into too much detail. We offer irrigation design as a service, so it's something that, and you'd get that from most irrigation shops in the country where you can produce, and I think you guys would have used us for that before. So you can produce a scaled diagram, bring it to us, give us the information that we need, and then we can design the system for you. We do that for people all around Australia. We do it for, we're members of Facebook groups, and we've got residential people having that as a service, and then we do it all the way up to, where are they? We have massive like subdivisions, and we've got a full-time designer. Oh, like that there. So that's one of our designs. So we'll design, an oval or an entry statement for a subdivision or anything. So the key with that, like anything, is if we get shitty information in, it's going to be the same out. So the diagram we ideally wants to be at scale, and the flow rate needs to be tested and correct. So what do we got there? So obviously you're in design, so you're familiar with scale and everything. So if you could give us one of your diagrams, we could design an irrigation system straight off that.
Okay.
You wouldn't need to do anything different, as long as it's to scale.
Yeah.
We know where the water point is, we know where the power is, and we know the soil type within reason, like the suburb, coastal versus, I mean, you guys do a lot of work on the coast, don't you? Yeah, so if it's really sandy, we need to apply different amounts of water, and if it's really clay, we have to have drip will be further out.
Yeah.
So these guides here are something that Rainbird produced. We've got some designed, but we haven't printed them yet. They're quite handy for a homeowner. They can draw their lawn here, and it could be as basic as that. So if we get that in, and they say, hey, we're going to plant some kikuyu, it's in Rostrevor, it's pretty clayey, can we get a sprinkler design for that? We'll design it up, and we'll give them a no obligation quote, and they can choose to buy it or not. Do you guys do your own design for irrigation, or?
We have a garden, a landscape designer.
Yep.
But we also have Justin, who's our irrigation.
Yeah, and he's been doing it for 30, 20, I don't know. I don't want to say 30, it's probably rude, 20 years.
He just looks at numbers and then does it in his head. So.
Yeah, and it's like anything. If you do enough of it, it just, most of anyone in this shop can look at that and know what it is without touching it. They can say that that's 6 sprinklers and this is where they go. This is how much water they use, because it's so familiar. It's just when we start getting weird landscape design shapes, real curvy or circle lawns, that it starts to get challenging, because sprinklers work best in 90-degree squares and like double square rectangles, and so that's why I've drawn that picture there, because it's a double squared rectangle. It's a dream to design. When it gets down to that, you're kind of getting a bit more complicated because things are changing. So what a customer will do is they'll come in and they'll say, I want to get an irrigation system designed, and we'll usually say, what's your water pressure like? And they'll say it's really good or it's pretty good. Now, we can't use either of those. So we would get them to either test their pressure versus flow using a device like this, right? Or they would just fill up a bucket. So this one here is, gives us the best result. That's a digital flow meter, so the water passing through that will throw a number, and then that is a pressure gauge that we will set. So how this works, we connect that to the water source. This one can be used commercially on, say, a 40 ml water meter, or residentially on a garden tap. So we could take this off. And just connect that to a tap. And just have the water flow through there. The idea behind the pressure gauge is for us to get a flow at a pressure. So you wouldn't have done this before, hey?
No, we've always sort of wanted to if you could buy something that...
Well, we sell these. So
like that,
you might... Like this is a kit that we sell. We've built them up because we needed them. We had enough people asking for them. The good thing with this kit is you can really take it down to nothing. This training is not meant to be a sales event either, so don't take it like that. We lend these out to people for free as well. I think for free. I have to check with Matt. So you could just put that on your tap and just put a bucket underneath there, and that'll actually give you a digital reading of the flow. The idea behind the pressure is that when you get the water flowing through it, you adjust this ball valve. TK's loving it. Another blooper reel. You adjust the ball valve to get to a pressure and then measure the flow at that pressure. So if you were coming to us to give us pressure versus flow for a commercial irrigation system, we'd require an answer along the lines of, we have 120 litres a minute at 400 kPa, we've got 100 at 300 and 80 at 200, and then we can kind of graph the flow and we'll get a good understanding of what the flow is. Residentially, it's not too much of an issue. Usually we just get a bucket, turn the tap right on, shove the bucket under the tap, time how long it takes to fill up the bucket, and then you'll come in and say, we've got 9 litres. A 9 litre bucket took 20 seconds to fill up, and then we reverse engineer that. You don't even have to do the calculations, we'll do it for you.
Yeah.
So I'll talk a little bit about head to head. So the sprinklers that we sell are all manufactured by professional brands. So Rainbird, Hunter, Toro, there's other Orbit. Some do good controllers, some do good sprinklers, some do good valves, and we've kind of built what we consider to be the preferred range of products. You'll have a favourite sprinkler that you use that we might not use as much of, and you have a favourite valve so you might like that, and you might have a standardised controller that you guys use because you have for the last 8 or 10 years, and it's never caused you any troubles. And the new controllers that have come out you haven't looked at because you don't need to, and whatever it is. We sell a lot of Rainbird control. Orbit controllers have become quite technologically advanced in a short amount of time, so their Wi-Fi capacity is pretty crazy, and they're quite inexpensive for what they can do.
Yeah,
so
I had to get one up at Victor one time. Although on the side it did say, use the app, blah blah blah, Wi-Fi, and then I got it and read it properly. It's like, not Wi-Fi.
Yeah, you need
to be able to operate it from home, like he lives here, and there's a holiday house.
So it wasn't Wi-Fi enabled?
No, so it wasn't the actual Beehive one. It just set on like an app and a phone thing. So we just grabbed it because it was the only one there.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, this one.
There's sometimes you can get marketing confusion with Bluetooth, and they'll be like, you can program this from your phone, which you can, but you have to be within 20 meters of it. So, yeah. So because the sprinklers are manufactured by professional companies, they all have data in the back end of the sprinkler. So they're tested in wind tunnels, and they'll give you a spec sheet to say an MP rotator, MP1000 at 90 degrees will use 1.5 litres per minute at X kPa, and then you can then go, okay, that's good. So we've done our flow test. We will then work out what sprinklers we need to do, what we want to throw. So I'm going to get you to do these ones. So I'll just grab the MP rotator chart so I can talk about it. So I'm going to use the MP rotator for this purpose because it's the most commonly sold head that we sell for this purpose. Are you familiar with these?
Yeah.
Yep. Have you seen these before?
Yeah.
So they're a finger spray. They're a matched precipitation head. So when you design them correctly, you'll get even watering. So if you put the sprinklers in the right spot, no matter where you put a cup,
There won't be those little missing corners and patches. That
Yep.
you see
So
all the time.
you could do a catch can test, and they'll all be identical if they're installed properly and there's no
That's
wind.
good.
I mean, obviously, if we can get 85% perfect, that's great. A lot of sprinkler systems are working at 50 and 60% efficiency, and the lawn's green. It's just not efficient. Like the water, there might be more water being wasted because they have to overwater it to get it right.
Yeah.
So, if you have a look at these charts, I guess this is trying to teach you guys to fish a little bit. So, when we're trying to design a rectangle like this, 6 meters by 12 meters, we want to find a sprinkler that throws 6 meters. So, if you look in these graphs, or these charts, you'll find the MP2000. If you work down that side, where is it? There. See, it says 5.8, 6.4.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. So you're at 6.1 there. So that 90 degree throws 6.1 meter radius, which is what we want for here because we want to throw head to head. And then it'll also tell you how much water it uses to do so and what pressure it needs to throw that.
Right.
So this here is the kPa, so it's 200, 280, 350. So at 200 kPa, it'll throw 6.1, and it will use. Where is it back? I'm looking upside down.
Flow?
Yeah. Is there a flow in litres? Yeah, so 0.8
Yeah.
litres a minute. So for us to do head to head, I'll draw it on mine. For us to do head to head, we're putting a sprinkler there and there. So that one's hitting that one and that one's hitting that one. We need to do the same the other way. So that one's hitting that one. And then we want one here. So that one's hitting that one and it's hitting that one. And same there. So they're all head to head. So if that was a square, there's one in each corner. That's one in each corner. You'd keep going. If that lawn went that way, you'd have one there and one there. So that's a grid of sprinklers. If we do an oval, it's the same deal. It's just like that. That's rough.
Right.
Or they'll go that way, or they'll go that way. So every sprinkler is getting watered by the sprinklers that are closest to it. You're getting matched precipitation.
No gaps.
No gaps, and then it'll tell you the millimetres per hour of water that it's delivering. So that's important for your programming, and we'll talk about that a bit later on. But if it's designed properly and they're installed properly, you'll get that flow. So then you can go back and say, look, there's actual science behind this. These sprinklers throw 11 mil per hour. You want 25 mil a week when it's 30 degrees, maybe. So we need to water for 2.4 hours a week. Let's do that in 2 watering so we can get some nice deep watering, or whatever it works out to, because there might be water restrictions and you might have to go, well, we can only do it for an hour. So we'll do an hour and 40 minutes or whatever it is. So that's, I guess, basic sprinkler design. The same principle will apply for here. And all you'll do is go, okay, what throws 4 metres? And you'll find the right head. And you'll put one there. And you'll put one there. But then you can have this, when it goes from 4 to 6, that's like, okay, what do we do? Because you can't put a 6 metre spray in that corner to spray to that corner, because it's going to overspray that corner. So then we have to put either one in the middle or choose to leave it and go right out to the end. So there's a lot of science behind irrigation design, but sometimes we have to get arty, because that's, especially when, I guess, with what you'd be seeing, smaller blocks, or I guess when the design, like, you wouldn't be thinking about irrigation when you're designing.
No.
It's not a priority. The design comes first, and then the irrigation has to work around. So, yeah, it depends on the client. Obviously, it's not obviously. I've just had my backyard designed, and it's all straight edges, and it's like a landscape design that's been designed purely for irrigation purposes. It won't look good, but it waters really well. So that's sprinklers. I don't want to go too much into it. As I said, it's irrigation basics. I think it's just important that you know the basic understanding of design, and know that you can come to us and call us and say, hey, I've got a triangle, what should I do? Or I've got almost a bean. How do we do it? And often our guys will sit down with a compass, choose a radius, and just start plotting. And they'll just start drawing around the bean and be like, oh, I don't know, move that one there, move that one there. And then one of them will take it to another one and say, hey, what do you think? And they'll be like, oh, I wouldn't do that, I'd put that there. It's honestly that. Like, it's that. Yeah, because none of the lawns are the same. And they're never a perfect square or a double rectangle. So, yeah. What's that?
Just minimising wastage.
Yeah, well, we're trying not to. So we'll ask the client: is there a window there? Is there a pool fence?
Yeah.
You know, if there's a glass pool fence, then if we're going to overspray, we want it to be that side, not that side, because we don't want the fence to get wet. But they're happy for their driveway to get wet or whatever.
Yeah.
If overspray is a massive issue, then you look at going down the subsurface for lawn path, and then you won't have any overhead watering. You guys do a lot of subsurface installation. So obviously it's working. I know that they'd have lawns that are probably 10 or 15 years old that have had subsurface down for that long.
On the overhead water is when I visit, because they have to water.
Oh, because you need a water to establish the lawn.
Sprinkler to water the fertiliser.
Yeah.
It can't be subsurface. Some people have switched on subsurface and they left it on for 2 hours, and then they say, oh, I haven't seen any, I can still see the fertiliser on the lawn. You didn't water it in, did you?
No.
You watered underneath it. So.
Yeah. So would you install a sprinkler system and a subsurface, or you just hand water?
We'd install subby, and we'd tell them every time after, I'd rather know, or I'd get them used to, whenever I come, you've got to water it in for half an hour, 45 minutes afterwards. Yeah,
it makes sense. People still won't do it though, because people don't listen, but I guess as long as it's written down. So that's sprinkler design. If you turn over the page, I'll talk about irrigation design with drip tube. So I've got examples of the same shapes down the bottom. When we're designing drip tube, you could literally draw each drip tube. We don't do that. We work out the square metres of the area and then divide out the drip tube. So if it's 100 square metres and you're using 0.4 drip tube, you'll divide it by 0.4. So 100 divided by 0.4 or times it by 2.5. So 100 divided by 0.4 is 250. So you'd then use, for 100 square metre, so if it was 10 by 10, you'd do if that was 10 by 10, that's 250 metres of drip tube, like lineal metres going like that. And we've worked that out by dividing that by that. So we do the same thing for this. I was going to get you guys to do it, but you probably don't have a calculator there. So if we want to work out how many metres of drip tube we're using for that, we work out the total square metres, so 12 times 6, and divide it by 0.4 is 180 metres. So that's 180 lineal metres of drip tube. Yeah, or at 0.4. So when I say at 0.4, the drip tube is drippers every 400, and then the tube is spaced at 400.
Right.
If you wanted to put that drip tube closer together and go 0.3, you'd divide it by 0.3. So then we'd get 240 metres of 0.3. The reason we might want to do that is that it's quite sandy soil. So if this was a coastal job, you'd go 0.3. If it's anywhere else in South Australia except immediate coast is pretty much 0.4. 0.4 is fine. You guys use 0.3? Yeah. So, and there's nothing wrong with that. 0.3 is completely fine. The precipitation rate of 0.3 drip tube is quite high. So you might be delivering, say, I think 0.3 at 1.6. So 1.6 litres per hour is the dripper that's most commonly sold by us. I think that, are you using Copper Shield?
Yeah.
So I think the flow rate on that's about 2.3. At 1.6, 0.3, 0.3, it's about 17.8 litres, mil an hour per square metre. Now, the sprinklers we just talked about are putting out 11, and the drip tube's putting out 18 or 17.8. So it's hard to comprehend, not hard to comprehend, but it sounds funny to think that those sprinklers are delivering less water per hour than that drip tube, because these are such efficient sprinklers. So at 0.4, 0.4, at 1.6, I don't remember the exact number, but it might be closer to that 11 or 12 litres a minute. Mil per hour. By getting to that point, and you shouldn't do this, but you could theoretically run that drip tube in the garden and that sprinkler system on the same valve, because they're both delivering 10 or 11 mil an hour per square metre, if you got stuck. So if you had, you know what I mean? So if you had a site where that concreters had already concreted and you only had one line out and you had a lawn and a garden, you could put MP rotators on the lawn and 0.4, 0.4 in the garden. It's not ideal, but it might be enough to keep that alive. Obviously the lawn might need more water sometimes in the garden, but so once we've worked out the meters of drip tube that we need, then we divide that again to work out how many drippers we're getting. So if we worked on that 180, we've got 180 meters of tube, and there's a dripper every 400. So we're dividing that by 0.4 again, and we're getting 450 drippers. And then each of those drippers is 1.6 litres an hour, so it's 720 litres per hour. And then we want to get to litres a minute because it's a figure that we work well in. So then we divide that by 60, and we're at 12 litres a minute for that area there. Now, most residential flow tests that we do are going to be 20 to 30 litres a minute. So you know now that that's one valve.
20 litres a minute, I think.
Is that 12 litres a minute?
Yeah, sorry, an hour, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's not a massive area. What's that? 72 squares, and that's if we grid the drip tube. So the way that I've just been describing it is to grid the system. So we're having a header pipe at each end, and then we're running drip tube between those header pipes. Now, the idea behind that is that you can plant a plant anywhere, and it's getting the same amount of water as the rest of the garden.
Yeah.
You'll see a lot of people have a garden with a tree and a few other things, and they'll just snake the drip tube past like that. Now, if you're doing that, you're watering areas here with nothing. You're better off if you were doing that to put some black poly and actually have individual drippers at the base of each of those plants. Even if you had 2 drippers on either side, if it was a tree, or 4, so that you're getting that, I guess, large watering zone, so that the roots are going to grow out to that. Does that make sense? You've done, so you're familiar with this. Have you done header pipe and punch out?
Yeah.
Yep.
Black, like 90.
Yeah, so you'll have black pipe down there. Yep.
Yeah,
so I'll get, at the end of this, when we start playing with these fittings, I'll get some of that, and we can build a little manifold of this, so that you understand what.
Okay.
Obviously, talking about it's a lot different to doing it.
Yeah.
You've all got different levels of understanding of it. So what do you do? Are you not doing irrigation? You're more doing turf maintenance?
No, I do follow-up, so I do fertilising and stuff after we've laid it, but I also do go and do the lay, so it's the dig out crew basically, so we dig it out and lay everything and then do the irrigation and everything. So
okay, so you're doing irrigation.
I am doing irrigation, yeah.
Okay, cool.
But it's just, there's so many hands on deck. Sometimes I do irrigation, sometimes I have to do something.
And you're not... Yeah, okay, so I was just like, oh, you could probably host this. Like, that's why I'm curious. Yeah, that's cool. And I just want to make sure that I'm delivering value to you as well.
I actually do, practically, I do a lot of it. But it's the understanding the bigger picture of how to set it up. I think that's what they're wanting more from me as far as the business do, because then we can have two people who can sort out irrigation independently. Because a lot of the times I have that in the same time as I'm talking to a customer, they're asking for some irrigation advice or for a bigger plan for their place, and I just have to refer it to Justin. So.
And if he's on annual leave or sick or whatever, it leaves.
And a lot of the times it is basic stuff that I can already do, so I'm just not equipped to do it.
So
practically I do a lot of it, I just want to understand.
Yeah, you see how it clicks together, just not why. Okay, so is there any questions that have come up so far around, I guess, drip tube versus sprinklers from you guys?
No.
So drip tube is installed below the surface if it's a lawn, and it's obviously on the surface if it's a garden. If it's on the surface, then we recommend that you put mulch over the top of it. You can't see the drip tube. It's going to reduce evaporation, access for vandalism. It depends on the site, obviously. I think that's about it from drip tube. We'll have a bit of a play with some later, and cut it and put some fittings in, use some clips. So if you do have questions, let me know as well, because I'm trying to formulate a frequently asked questions section at the back of the guide. And my guy, it was funny, I said to the guys, what's the stupidest questions you're getting asked over the counter at the moment? They listed off a few, but what do you say? One of the common misconceptions is that you can, if you've got low pressure, just use smaller pipe and it will build the pressure up. So, and we get that a lot. So you've done your design, you've got your materials list, and now you're wondering about whether or not you're going to control it with, or how you're going to control it. So you can be as basic as turning a tap on and off to run an irrigation system, but you're only going to be able to turn one line on and off, or you need to start manifolding. So you'd have a 4-way tap adapter or a 2-way tap adapter, or you might have multiple garden taps around the house and you go out and turn them on and off. Obviously, if you do that, you're at the mercy of the memory of the person that's turning the taps on and off. And you can't go on holidays and water or whatever else you need to do. Now, technology in irrigation has probably come the furthest in the last 2 or 3 or 4 years than it has prior to that from a control standpoint. Obviously, a lot of sprinkler development happened through the late 90s, early 2000s with things like the MP rotator. Might have even been in the 90s.
Is that just demand, or why is it a big spike?
I think that the technology, the cost of development versus the return to manufacturer wasn't high enough. And that, you think about it, if you make a new iPhone, everyone buys it. But if you make a new controller, no one cares. Like, there's going to be some diehard irrigation people that are like, I'm going to upgrade my controller. But if you put that controller in your house tonight, you're not looking at that for 10 or 12 or 15 years. And it costs $199. You buy this for $1,400, and in 6 months the battery's not charging, and do you know what I mean? So there's no return on investment for these guys. But I think that people are becoming more conscious of their environmental impact and their water usage and the cost of water. So I think the cost, the reward's starting to get high enough for them. I guess also once one of them jumps off the cliff, the others start following. Beehive have made some strong ground with regards to Wi-Fi control. Hunter Hydro-wise have got some really strong technology around flow sensors and weather data. There's more information available. So then these guys are like, well, and they're not chasing, but they're like, okay, well, we'll have to have one, and then we have to have one, and then now they're all kind of fighting each other to have the best technology. So, there's enough technology in the world now and knowledge on the internet for you to build your own controller at home without this. You could go buy, I think it's a Raspberry Pi, is that the right? Yeah. Buy a Raspberry Pi, code your own thing, hook it up to a transformer, you don't need a controller. So I think they've had to acknowledge that if they're going to be stupid about it or expensive with it, people are just going to find other ways to do it.
Yeah.
And the barrier to entry for new irrigation controllers isn't there anymore. You know, I could probably start my own controller brand, get it made in China through Alibaba, and compete with these guys. So I think they're forced to be more advanced.
Yeah.
So if you just, so you can go from turn that tap on and off up to you know, reprogram your controller while on holidays in Greece because the weather data has told you need to, or don't even touch it because you've pre-programmed your controller that it knows that it rained 15 mil today and it's been pre-programmed to turn off for 2 days if it gets more than 15 mil, or if there was more than whatever. There's so much there now. I mean,
that's really cool.
yeah, so the Hunter Hydro-Wise,
Nice. Yeah.
it's an expensive thing to set up because of the infrastructure you need, all the hardware to start with. So the flow sensor and the controllers are the most expensive on the market. You need a flow sensor if you're going to use that technology, but you can tell the controller that so valve 1 is expected to use 20 litres a minute, valve 2 is expected to use 14 litres a minute, valve 3 is expected to use whatever, and then the flow sensor learns that, and if the flow sensor, I guess, identifies a spike in flow, it knows that something's gone wrong. So it'll turn that valve off and then report back to you that valve 1 was running at 40 litres a minute, it's only meant to be 28, so a sprinkler's either been kicked off or there's a breakage in the line, and it shuts that down, saves you from losing the water, but it also saves you from any potential damage to a property or blood bubbles. Hang on.
Yeah.
So, but you need to then be happy to spend the money on that infrastructure, and you know that could be $1,000 worth of hardware by the time you buy the controller, the flow sensor.
The flow sensor automatically adjusts the controller to stop watering if it's been raining a lot? Does it do with that? Like,
The flow sensor doesn't need to adjust the controller so much. The controller adjusts from the weather data.
Okay.
So it knows what it's meant to put out and it puts it out. The controller will have a couple of switches in it. So you might say, if the Bureau of Meteorology forecasts an 85% chance of 15 mil or more, turn it off. So it's working on forecasted data.
Okay.
Or it might say, if the temperatures were above 40 degrees for the day, increase our run times by 25%. So you can set all those parameters and then just leave it. So your plants are getting exactly what they need, or your lawn's getting exactly what it needs. The flow sensor's there to be able to track your water usage and obviously identify, you know, breakages. Just, I guess, any errors in what you're expecting to happen versus what's happened. And then I guess beyond what you guys are thinking about at council level, they can do that, have a central control computer that's pulling data from 85 ovals and parks all into one computer, and can share the water load between, like they might have 3 pumps in the council area running that, so that if they know that they can turn on a sprinkler at the school and a sprinkler at the park at the same time, and then they go off, and then a garden can turn on at the cemetery, and so it learns how to share the water. Okay. So there's the technologies there at golf course and council level, really, I guess, deep technologies being used, but they haven't kind of transitioned it down to the residential controllers as much. But it's getting there. You know, you could put those beehive controllers in now as a contractor and have, I don't know how many, say 30 or 60 of your clients' controllers coming back to your device, so it could report back to you as only or as well. So you might say, look, we've got a package for our clients where for $50 a month we'll monitor your irrigation, we'll send you reports on your water usage, we'll be there within 24 hours of any fault, or 12 hours or 8 hours or whatever you want to do. You don't have to think about it. You've got more shit to worry about. You've got surgery, you've got to go buy your art, whatever. But there's people, they don't want to think about it. So you know, and the technology's now there, and I don't think anyone's created a good business from that. You know, I've heard people talk about it and say, we're going to put hydro risers in and we're going to charge our clients subscription, and it's good business, but no one's doing it. So make that into a clip. Someone can do that. So these are, I guess it's important if you're dealing with clients to find out from your client what's important to them. So the Rainbird Wi-Fi controllers don't have the ability to receive sensor. They don't have a sensor input for flow yet. I imagine they will, but they don't right now. So they're the good thing with Rainbird controllers is they're a bare controller first. So you can buy just a standard 4-station controller for, I'll say, $150. And then you can upgrade it to a Wi-Fi controller using a link module, which you don't need to have Wi-Fi, but you can have Wi-Fi. So beehives come Wi-Fi only. So you're paying to have that Wi-Fi there, even though you might not use it. Hunter Hydro-Wise has Wi-Fi, whether or not you want it or not.
Yeah.
So I was a bit skeptical of when they did this, because I was like, well, why don't you just put Wi-Fi in the controller? Like,
Yeah.
you're doing the controller anyway. But by doing it, they've kept the cost down.
Yeah.
So the ESPME, if you wanted to Wi-Fi this, you just stick the dongle in there, and then it becomes a Wi-Fi controller. Something that's important to remember when using a Wi-Fi controller is you have to have Wi-Fi. And I know that sounds stupid, but we've had a few people that have bought a Wi-Fi controller and then they've been at a shack and they just didn't think that didn't mean that the controller didn't have its own modem. So I know that, I think that we've had some success with people using 4G SIM with internet device. So I guess having a 4G SIM with like an external, you know what I mean?
The data rate's pretty small on that. So
Yeah, well, it doesn't use a lot of data, and 4G is so accessible now. But I don't think Rainbird's controllers work with the Telstra 4G, but they work with the Optus 4G. So, it's there. If you wanted to go to the trouble of having it, if you've got a shack and there's no, who hasn't got internet at their shack now? But so I guess people that want to, detach from reality for a little while, that's why they go up there, isn't it? So you can, the Wi-Fi controllers we stock are Rainbird, Hunter and Orbit. Toro don't have one. And there's probably a multitude of other brands. We, as I said at the start, we've kind of curated this stock that we believe is the best for us. We hold Hunter valves, Irrigation valves, Rainbird valves. We hold Rainbird controllers, Hunter controllers, Orbit controllers, Toro controllers. And if you're doing enough of this, you'll start to familiarise yourself with what brands you feel most confident with. You obviously see Rainbird everywhere in here. We've got a very good relationship with them. They support us a lot. None of this, we don't have to buy this stuff. That's just, they give us merchandise and training and support. And we don't choose them because of that. We believe that they're the best brand, and that this is, I guess, a nice icing on the cake. There are products outside of Rainbird that are better than some Rainbird products. So, and it's funny, I put a lot of this content on film and put it up when it pisses off our suppliers, but I'd rather be honest, so that when you do hear me say something, I'm not making it up. Hunter make a battery-operated valve called a node, which you guys would be familiar with. So that's another way you could control a system if you don't have power. So obviously, if you're going to run a controller, you need to plug it into a wall, or a generator, which is unrealistic. So that needs to plug in. Hunter do an XC hybrid, which is a battery-operated controller like this that can be converted to a power controller later. I don't know if have you guys used them?
No.
So
I used the old nodes like a while ago.
Nodes are great we sell heaps to councils who need to water a roundabout and can't get power out to the roundabout.
Yeah.
It's a battery operated controller that opens and closes a solenoid valve using a battery rather than a controller, and you just have to go replace the battery every year or two. The newer nodes, which are 5 years old now, I think, take 2 batteries, so you're replacing the batteries less often. And the way that valve works is by latching the solenoid valve open, not actually continually sending power to it, so the batteries actually last quite a long time because they're only doing a microsecond of work and then another. So whereas these controllers are sending constant electricity to the valve while they're operating, and if the electricity gets turned off, the valve will close. So the controllers are 240 volt, but they're transforming down to 24 volts. So the cable that you're running, that's the smallest of the cables, if you were to hit that with a shovel while it was on, or chew through it, or an animal was to bite through it, it's not going to, they'll know they've done it, but it's not going to kill anyone. It's only 24. Yeah, there you go. You chewed through it? Yeah, and you wouldn't, of course. You wouldn't even know.
No.
So So then once you've selected your controller, you obviously need to program the controller, and this is probably something that you're not doing yet, or that you want to learn about. So I'm happy to plug one of these in and you can go through it. What controllers are you guys installing?
The ones that we've got already in there are all controllers.
Yep.
So
Orbit slide control or beehives? Yeah. So the slide control,
They're the older ones.
yeah. And I get why they're in there. Like, because your business is so established, you've got relationships with established controllers, and these are all new.
Yeah.
Orbit have been making slide controls for 25 years or something, and clients who maybe don't want to learn new technology or don't want to think about it, that slide feature is really good because they can just grab the slide and just go, oh, it's on, it's off, now it's back to 30 minutes of automatic and they don't have to worry about it. So most controllers program the same. You flick through the system, you start by setting it up like a you would have, I was going to say a VCR. Most of you guys probably don't even know what VCRs are. DK's like, a what? So it needs to know what time and day it is now, so you set the time and day, and then you work through the programming of it. If you want, we'll plug one in and we can go through it and I'll show you how to do it. It'll be the same with any controller, but we'll do it with an Orbit because it's obviously what you're familiar with.
They're very easy, the orbits, actually.
Yeah. Or the beehives, the good thing with the beehive is you can plug it in, connect it up to Wi-Fi, and then just go sit down on your lounge and do it on the phone. Like, you know.
I haven't done the beehive one yet, but...
The slides.
Well, the other one I said. No, not the slide, it's a dial one.
Yeah.
It's just not...
Is it a hardware shop? Did you get...
It was up at... where was it?
Invicta.
Landscape Supplies.
Yeah, so,
That's
yeah.
really all they had in there, and we sort of couldn't come back down here and grab one.
Well, hopefully we'll be able to deliver to Victor Harbour in the next month or two. We'll be closer. From Lonsdale. It's still not around the corner, but it's closer. Victor will be inside our deliveries.
Yeah.
So, you know, ideally you guys transition to a Wi-Fi controller. You plug it into the wall and set it up from your phone or your iPad or whatever you guys are using.
We might have one or two customers that already have it.
It'll happen because the internet's obviously making information readily available to everyone. Like, what is it? Like,
more and more people are wanting...
4 billion people have the internet. Yeah.
More and more people are wanting Wi-Fi. They want to be able to...
Well, they know about it.
Do it and do it from their phone and be able to change if they're at work. Or
Yeah, and if you don't know about it, and your client starts asking you about it, they're going to say maybe this guy's not the right guy for us. Like, you know, we know about it, or girl. We know the controller. They don't know the controller. So, you know, there's so many Facebook groups for lawn people, and there's, you know, so many blogs, and there's so many people talking about it. We're making videos every day that the homeowner, especially those people that are at work and have IP cameras on their lawn, or they've got security cameras, and they're like, well, the lawn looks a bit dry, and look at or like, look at the wife smell on the lawn, watch this, I'll turn the sprinklers on. Like, that technology's there now. So I think if you start moving down that path of using Wi-Fi controllers, you could get to a point where whoever's installing the job plugs the controller into the wall, connects it to the Wi-Fi and disappears, and then you've got someone back at the office running programs for that lawn, and then adjusting those programs as required, especially with new lawn. Obviously you guys are more versed on how much new lawn needs water-wise than anyone else, and you're going, okay, well, it's been 2 weeks, it's Christmas, it's going to be 40 whatever, let's lift it up a bit, and then you could do that for the first 90 days and then hand that information back to your client and say, there you go, the establishment period's finished. We were happy to warrant the plants, which a lot of landscapers are asked to do, but we're only going to warrant the plants if we've got exclusive access to the controller. We do that, and then you have your controller back.
That happens. That's
I know.
70%.
Because people go out and go like that, and then they ring you and say, my controller's not working, and you say, have you touched it? And they said, no.
Or it hits winter and then they flick it back on just as I rock up.
Yeah.
They flick it back on. No, we haven't turned it on.
Yeah. So if you've got exclusive...
Test how much penetration they've got.
Yeah. Well, the great thing about these controllers now is you can put password protection on them, so you can have a parent-child relationship on the controller, whereas the company's the parent and the client's the child. So if they make changes, you can get a data record of the fact that they've made changes and say, look, there's a password on it. No one's changed it but you. So you don't want to go down that path, but
having that proof in certain sets,
or even letting them know that you can. Even if you let them know that it's there, they're not going to touch it then.
Yeah.
Because they know, they're like, oh, Dad's going to catch me. So we're just talking. We're going to get a controller and actually program it.
Okay.
It'll be one that you might never use, but it'll give you the concept of programming. We can play with some of these as well. This one here, this is the controller. I don't talk about it all the time, but I love this controller because you can take the whole thing apart. So before Wi-Fi, you could take this panel off and put a 9-volt battery in it and effectively go sit like somewhere that's not in a dark shed full of spider webs and do your programming and then go take it back and put it back into the controller. It's not as necessary now, obviously, because Wi-Fi has made that feature redundant, but if you don't have Wi-Fi on site, you can still do it. Or you take that back to your office, that's on the wall, lawn gets installed, this gets programmed back at the office by someone that's the controller programming guru, and then they come back and just plug it in, good to go. So yeah, it just depends on what controller you're using. Those orbits, I can't see those orbits being around for much longer. Like, I think you'll be forced to stop using them, yeah, because I think they're too expensive to make. I mean, you can buy a Wi-Fi enabled controller for less than one of them, so they're actually quite expensive. So anyway, so we'll get a controller and program that after. Basically the principles of the programming are: tell the controller what time and day it is today, work out how much water you want and when, and then program that in. The data that you've worked out back when you were talking about sprinklers, so the 11 mil an hour or the 17 mil an hour, you then think about that and go, okay, well, our garden needs this, our lawn needs this, these are the days that I want to do it. Plug that data into the controller, that's it. Obviously, as the weather changes, you can adjust that by changing the percentages. So you could reprogram your times, or you could just say the average day is 100%, a hot day is 150%, and a cold day is...
That would get you through summer and winter season.
Well, you'd have to go, you just go change, so you could leave all the programs as they are and just do seasonal adjust, where you go down to 70% of what it was.
Okay.
So you're doing 70, yeah, everything. So if it's for a client that you're like, look, I know you don't understand it, I'm going to just ask you to do one thing, seasonal adjust to 50%.
Yeah.
That's all you have to do, and then take it back to 100 when it's spring and go to 120 in summer or whatever. It's not as commonly used, I don't think, now, because of all of that weather data just makes that null and void. But because they've been written into controller programs for so long, it'll always be there. So, I need a solenoid valve. So those controllers obviously run cable. We run cable from those controllers to a solenoid valve. I'm just going to grab one so that you guys can have a look at it. We've got Irrigation, Rainbird and Hunter. They're all solenoid valves. They're all 25 mil thread. They're all mains pressure rated. They all run 24 volt AC coils. They're all flow control. It's the, I guess, Coke, Pepsi and something else. Mountain Dew. Dr. Pepper over here. The way they operate is the controller sends electricity from its out port. So once you program the controller, when it's time to go, it sends electricity out of these ports out to the valves. So you would wire one of the wires into, say, the common, and one of the wires into valve 1, and then the next valve you'd have one of the wires into the common, and then the other wire into valve 2. So that's valve 1, that's valve 2, that's valve 3. When the controller knows that it's time to go, it sends an electrical current through the 2 wires that are wired to the valve that you've told it is valve 1 or 2. The electricity lifts a magnet in here, which changes the pressure in the valve and pops the valve open. That stays open the whole time. So that's like it just goes up. You can push that in. So all that does is it takes itself it lifts itself up off of that hole.
Okay.
And the pressure changes in the valve, and then water can push through. When the electricity stops, it's probably mine. When the electricity stops, that pin pushes back down. It closes that, I guess, pressure, and the water then pushes the diaphragm up. So there's a rubber diaphragm in here. Matt's just going to get me one that's open so I can show you the inside of a valve. The solenoid valves are the most common issue with irrigation systems. If something's not working, it's the solenoid valve. So even contractors will get ringing us going, I can't work out what's going on. I don't know why the valve's not turning on or not turning off. So I've put some examples here of why valves wouldn't turn on or wouldn't turn off. This isn't updated, thanks. This is my second draft, not my third draft. So that top line's incorrect, not enough pressure. That's meant to say no water. So sometimes if a valve doesn't open, it's sometimes because there's no water, as in the ball valve that's in front of the valves hasn't been turned on. So the contractor's installed it and just gone, oh man, I forgot to turn the valve on. If there's no water, they won't turn on. If there's a breakage in these cables, or the cable join hasn't been done well, the electricity obviously can't come from the controller to the valve won't turn on. If this coil is damaged, so they used to have a metal thing on top of them, you might have seen them. This is a new coil that Toro have made. They used to rust, and then the inside of this would get damaged, and that electromagnetic function that you can hear that couldn't occur because it was rusted over. So that would be one reason why they wouldn't turn on. Or there's a blockage somewhere on the inset or the outlet of the pipe, or there's a blockage, like there's a rock stopping the diaphragm from lifting up. So the unfortunate thing, and look, it's part of being a contractor in irrigation. If a valve's not opening or closing, you need to go work out why. There's no reporting that the controller's going to tell you. Some of the new controllers can tell you if the circuit's current, like if it's working. So then you know if it's not an electrical fault, it's a physical fault. But basically you just need to go out there and start troubleshooting. So you might say, take one of the wires from valve 1 and change it over to valve 2 and see if the controller will turn it on as valve 2. If it does, then you know the controller's got an issue at valve 1's port. Or you'll take the coil off of valve 1 and switch it with valve 2 in the box. And then if that works, you know it's the coil. If it doesn't, then it's maybe the whole cable. Or if it doesn't, then it's probably something physical in the valve. At that point, you'll take all these screws off, lift that off, have a look inside the valve. I want to take one apart because you guys need to see it. I'm going to do this one because it's got the least amount of screws. Yep. A contractor that does this full time, yeah, you should be right, would have a drill for this. So it's like changing a car tyre. When you take them apart and put them back together, you want to get even, especially with these valves, you want to kind of do one across, one across, one across, one across, and then evenly close them so that you're putting even pressure on the diaphragm. Sorry to make you do this, man.
They're actually a lot harder than I thought.
Yeah, I was the same. I was like, yep, that's yours. So if you could have a drill, so an irrigation contractor would have a drill with a long, like Phillips head, and they'd just pop them out, and there'd be no worries. It's uncommon to have issues with the valves in after they're installed. So you're usually only going to have an issue in the first week because there's still debris in the pipe after you've installed it, or you're going to have an issue in 15 years because they've gotten old. But these products last for a long time. There's not many moving parts, and they're often lubricated, so when they are moving, they're not wearing. So he'll get that open. We'll get to that. So if the valve's not turning off, it could be because there's a rock holding the diaphragm. It could be because the diaphragm's got a tear in it and it won't ever turn off because the pressure won't change, or there's not enough flow or pressure. So and this is an issue with small courtyard gardens now, sometimes there'll be 2 pots and that's it. If there's not enough water flowing through the valve, because there's only 2 drippers, the valve will open, but there's not enough flow or pressure to close it. So if you systematically go through this process and then it doesn't work, that's when we're getting phone calls saying, I've done this, I've done that, I've done that, I've done that. And it's rare, but it could be that there's a batch issue with the product, or if all valves are doing it, and that it's very, very rare. That design, this valve, is at least 25 years old, maybe 30 years old. They have not changed the design at all, and that's because they work. So I'll just go through a few things on the valve. So that's a flow control, that top there. So you screw that down, and the pin pushes down on the diaphragm. It's designed to reduce the flow. This is a bleed screw. So you can open, if you lift that, take that bleed screw out, it bleeds the pressure from the top of the valve. It'll actually squirt any debris out that's in there, and it turns the valve on. So if you take that screw out or lose it, the valve's stuck on and water will be squirting out of that hole and you'll fill your valve box up. So a lot of people will use that bleed screw as a manual test. You can turn these valves manually on just by turning the coil like a quarter turn. So what you're doing by doing that is simulating that pin lifting, because you don't have the electricity to do it, and because that pin movement's so like minute, that quarter turn it pops up. So same with this one, you turn that a quarter turn, valve turns on, quarter turn, valve turns off. So you could install these in the ground. Say you had a client that didn't want to spend the money on a controller, but they're going to do it in 2 years. You could put the valves in, because it's going to cost you the same to put a ball valve in as it's going to cost to put a solenoid valve in. They're all similar price points. You put them in, you could manually run them, it's not ideal, and then they could upgrade to the controller later. So can you hear them trying to find a drill? It's their own fault. They should put them away. So that flow control that I talked about, it's not often used. We stock only flow control valves because the price point between a flow control and non-flow control valve was like 50 cents. And it was just silly to have 6 valves instead of 3 valves. You can use it, you wind it down, it reduces the flow. I can't remember ever using it. People often confuse flow and pressure and will try and turn the flow down when they're actually trying to get the pressure reduced. So don't do that. If you need to reduce the pressure, you'll need to actually fit a pressure reducer to the system. And that takes us probably to the next page, which is pressure reduction. So sprinklers and drippers are designed to work at certain pressures. The rubber diaphragm inside the dripper requires a certain amount of pressure, not too much, not too little, for it to operate effectively. The drip tube that we sell is all pressure compensating, which means it delivers a certain amount of water per dripper per hour. So the 1.6 litres an hour, that's only going to do that if it's got the right pressure coming in, and 2.3 only if the right pressure is going in. Some of NetFM's drip tube won't actually turn on unless it's got a certain amount of pressure coming in. So it's an AS, it's an anti-siphon drip tube. So it's designed to not drip. So if you turn the system off, the system stays fully charged with water. So if it's on a hill or whatever, you're not draining all that water out at the end of a system, and then you'll find it happens with sprinklers as well.
Can you help that with the sprinklers?
The sprinklers you install a check valve. So we've got them here. I'll grab some of that. So the way that works, when a sprinkler pops up and goes back down, there's nothing sealing the sprinkler. It's just open because it doesn't need to be sealed. If it's just a normal system and water drained out, it's just draining into the lawn and it's fine. If it's on a massive hill, every bit of water in that pipe will come out that bottom sprinkler and you'll cause flooding. So they'll usually check valve them up all the way, or they might do the first 3 of the 5 sprinklers. So when they turn off, there's a rubber thing that's been stuck in the bottom of the sprinkler in the filter, and that seals off the sprinkler. So all the water in the pipe stays charged in the pipe. So some of Rainbird sprinklers come standard with that as a part. And these are the things that, like, I talked before about Rainbird. All of those little features, like they've got pressure regulating stems so the actual, instead of putting a pressure reducer in your valve, the sprinkler has one automatically in the sprinkler. They've got automatic shut off, so you know how you're trying to change a nozzle out on site and the sprinkler's turning, you can just turn a key in the top of the sprinkler stays popped up, all the other sprinklers stay on, but the sprinkler you're operating on, just no water comes out. So you just pull the nozzle out, put a new nozzle in, turn the water back on. So all of those features, we try to have them as a standard stock line, so that it gives you guys a point of difference on site. So if you're quoting against a contractor that's maybe not licensed to be doing the work they're doing, or someone that's just decided they're going to start doing irrigation on weekends and they're buying it from a local hardware, you're buying premium quality brands, and you can go to your client and go, well, we're using this, these are why, this is the data behind. You could work out how much water your system is going to use every week so that they can have an actual number on how much money it's going to cost them to irrigate, especially at your level. If you're back there designing a system and you're saying, look, this is a 1,000 square metre block, you're sure you want to go garden there, or you're sure you want to go tropical there, or this is how much we're going to need, I've done the numbers, you know what your water cost is, you're going to have to at least be delivering 5 hours a week at this cost, and it empowers the person to make some decisions around what they might do. So, and obviously you'd be having conversations around so many other things back here, around stone and colours and whatever stuff I don't understand. If you can have that conversation with them as well, it just adds tools to your tool belt. So pressure reduction is probably more important at a drip level than a sprinkler level, but as we looked at before, these numbers down here, the 2.8 or 280 kPa to get 6 metres, thanks Maddie, if you don't get that pressure, those MP rotators aren't going to throw that distance. Now, MP rotators are an adjustable nozzle, but if you don't get the pressure reduction down to where it needs to be, you can't adjust them. So we'll have people come in here saying, hey, it's meant to adjust at least 20% down, I can't get it down. It's because there's too much pressure going in and the gearing just can't handle it, and you won't adjust it. So Matt's opened this valve. So he's taken the 4 screws out. They're all they're encapsulated screws. So you're not losing screws. These aren't. So especially with 8, there's a 5 out of 10 times you'll lose one of those screws in a valve box. So that's good. So that's the diaphragm. So you've got to be careful with these because they're obviously the moving part. And I'm just going to rip it. So when we take a valve apart, we take that top bonnet off, and we want to make sure there's nothing in here. So there's no rocks, no dirt. It needs to look like this. No tears. If that bit's fine, we take the diaphragm out and we look in there. So if you have a look at the bottom of that valve, it looks like there's some debris down there. So these valves are all tested before they come out of the factory. So that's, I'm going to guess, either Chinese or Mexican water. So don't lick your fingers. I don't know where it's from, but so this is all, you know, it's brand new. It's all in good repair. That's all in good repair. There's no cracks, there's no splits. Okay, that's odd. Or this has got a hairline cut in it. So then we can say, okay, we'll go to the local irrigation shop, we'll buy a new one, take it out and refit it, because a lot of times this base is sitting in the ground in a manifold. So that's all screwed up, glued up. If you needed to take the valve out, you're cutting the manifold and gluing a new one, or you're using, I don't have any here, like barrel union manifold fittings. You'll never ever break that. There's nothing that moves in that. So and that's the advantage of choosing the brands like Hunter, Rainbird and Toro, is that they're not changing their brands. So if you're going back to a site that's got a problem with the top half of the valve, and the only things that go wrong are that and the coil. So these are the moving parts. They're the only things that you'll have issues with. If that doesn't break, that stays in the ground, you could effectively buy a new valve, throw that away, put the new one on top, put a new diaphragm in, put a new coil in, and you've got another 15 or 20 year valve. So that's why it's a good idea to buy reputable brands that aren't kind of, you know, 1 year imports into a hardware shop or whatever, because then you'll always have access to spare parts. And the thing is, it's not like spare parts for cars. These valves don't cost any more than cheap valves. They're all, you know, because I guess they've made their money on the die or the patent or whatever they had. Nothing needs to be changed, so you can just keep buying them, and they're competitive. Like I don't know what yeah, probably. Awkward. That was a test. You've passed.
Thank you.
You will get your certificate of completion. Oh shit, you know what? I should have made some certificates of completion today.
Yeah.
Oh well, next training session. These are just going to get better and better. Yeah, so there are 3 parts that go back in here. That one there. So all of the valves operate the same. There's a coil that lifts, the diaphragm pops. The diaphragms are all different designs, obviously. They can't all be the same because they'd be ripping off people's designs. But if you need to take one apart and... trying to be quiet. If you need to take one apart to troubleshoot it, it's the same process. Take the screws off, take the top off, be careful, don't lose the spring, put it back, all the parts that you took out go back in. And that's valves. How much time have we got? All right, I want to get you guys actually playing with some parts. So pressure reduction, I'll go quickly through this. You can get fixed pressure reducers after the valve, or you can actually get pressure reducers that screw in underneath the coil. So if space is tight, you can actually screw the coil off and stick a pressure reducer underneath that. You would never have seen them, eh? No. I'll get some of them and show you. You use a dial and you can adjust the pressure. I don't know how it works. Like, I couldn't explain the science behind it. Someone here probably can. But it means that if you've installed a system and you've got sprinkler pipe here, and you're like, I've got stuff blowing off or the drippers aren't working, you can actually fit the pressure reducer to the top of the valve without actually having to rip everything out. Okay. So it's a bit more expensive. It might be $100 for that pressure reducer versus say 20 for an inline one, but you compare that to the labour of taking it apart. So, or you can't be bothered, there's always that. That would be my solution, that would be my answer. Filtration's important if you're pulling water from a river, a dam, or bore, even a rainwater tank, if it's getting, I guess, leaf litter on top of the tank. We don't sell a lot of filters into residential irrigation systems because the chances of dirty water getting into those valves is so low, it's not funny. But if something did happen on the road, so on the other side of the house, so United Water or whoever, All Water, fixed a pipe and then some rubble got in the pipe and it got into your system, there's a risk that it might get into the valves or it might get into the drip tube. If it gets into the valves, you take the diaphragms apart and you clean them out and all that. So it might cause some grief. If you were going to leave anything out of a system because you had to, that would probably be something that I'd be leaving out first. So I won't go too much more into filters. Manifolds. we talk. Oh gosh, I'm running out of time. So manifolds are what we use to hold valves together. So when you design an irrigation system, you'll have a bank of solenoid valves. So each of these valves will screw onto a fitting, and you can glue them together. This is the original way of building a manifold. So you'd have pipe between them, and you'd glue them together. And you'd have one there, and you'd have one there. Now, the issue with this is if something goes wrong, or you're not a master at gluing, and one of your valves is like that, or you didn't get enough glue there and there was a slight leak, you have to cut that apart and rebuild it. Yeah, the cost of setting this up is nothing. You know, these fittings are probably $1 or $2 each. So they'll be in the ground.
Yeah.
And then your grass is there.
Right.
I'll just take that off now, you know. Put it on my stupidly expensive lounge that shouldn't be in here. So what they did is develop these barrel union fittings. So they've got an O-ring on them, so they don't need thread tape. And then you'll have that instead of that. And then you just screw that in like that.
Right.
So the good thing with this is you don't have, like, it's a barrel union.
You don't have to glue this one.
Nope, it's not glued, it's just tightened up. And then you do that for all of them. And then they don't leak because you've done it properly. And if something happens to that valve, you turn the water source off, undo this barrel union, and just take the valve out and put a new one in if you wanted to, or you could do what we did before, we take the valve apart and check it. They cost more. You know, they might be $10 per intersection, so that might be $30 with the fittings, and I don't know if that's the right price, but it would be close. But once it's in, you can know that if you have to take it apart, it's fine. This is another brand, so they do Tablet and Spears. I know there's other shops that have their own proprietary brands that lock in, that you just do a quarter turn and they're done. Everyone has their own preference. What are you guys using? Manifolds like this, or?
We make it ours.
Yeah, make their own. So everyone has their own way. Some people will make their own and put a barrel union in, or they'll leave more pipe between each bit, so you could leave a bigger gap. So if you needed to cut that off, you can cut it off and you can still stick another fitting back on. I used to make my own when we installed. I wasn't a fan of those. I can't give you too many reasons why. I'd always learnt to make them out of PVC. Yeah, and those barrel union fittings are quite sensitive. You're not meant to tighten them up with multi-grips, and everyone does.
Right.
You're meant to tighten them kind of hand tight, and everyone uses a multi-grip, and it'll be like, just give it a little bit. Now, what's a little bit?
But then undoing it's risky, isn't it?
Well, then you go the other way. Yeah. So, and some people will put grease on them so that they undo easily, and
right.
some people will rip the O-ring out and then put thread tape in it. So that's thread tape.
Oh yeah.
So you don't thread tape O-ring threads. You thread tape non-O-ring threads. So this one here, if it was going into a ball valve, you'd be putting thread tape on it. This thread tape's splintered off. So thread tape, you just hold it like so. I've not done this for a while. And then you just do that.
Right.
So this is a Teflon tape that's used to seal threads. Because if you just screwed that thread straight into the valve, there's a chance water would drip out. But by thread taping that, you can screw that into a valve now. So so that's what we've done here. So pink thread tape is just a thicker version of white thread tape. And when we're doing brass, you have to use thread tape, otherwise they leak.
Right, so that's a little seal.
Yeah, it's a sealed. So they make a liquid version of that. So you can paint it on, or there's a product called Loctite, which becomes like glue for threads, which is hard to undo. And as you'll notice, we haven't thread taped this bit because there's an O-ring there. So the O-ring does the sealing instead of the thread tape doing the sealing.
Okay.
What time is it? So that's manifolds, wire and wire join. So I'll just talk about residential wire joins. The wire that we've got here is 1/2 mil squared, and the wire we've got here is 1/2 mil squared. Wire comes in 3, 5, 7 and 9 core off the shelf, and we sell it in 50 and 100 metre rolls, or you can buy it per metre. So if you're not doing this every day of your life, you'd likely just buy, or you'd be really bad at doing what I'm doing if you didn't do it every day of your life. You'd buy per metre, so you might buy 20 metres because that's all you need. A lot of our contractors will have their own stock. So this is 3 core, black, yellow and white. When we're installing a system, we would use black as the common. So every valve gets wired to black. So that's what this little picture was to be. So you got one of your pens. So when you're wiring up solenoid valves, and you've got, so we'll just say 3, so we'll get rid of that. Common goes to every valve. So like that. And then 1 goes to 1, 2 goes to 2, and 3 goes to 3.
Right.
So when the controller sends out a signal, it'll send out a signal on C every time. So there's a signal going to 1, 2, and 3 every time. It sends out the other signal through 1, 2, or 3. So that closes that loop of 1, or closes that loop of 2, or closes that loop of 3. So the idea behind making the common black is that if you go back, so it's kind of standardising it. It's the accepted standard in Australia. I've got a feeling in America it's white. It's just weird, but you'll find that every cable, so this is the smallest quantity. They have a black and a white, and then they'll have a yellow, and then the 5-core will have like a blue and a green in it, or a blue and a brown. But they'll always have a black and a white. So it's up to people what they choose. We've always known it to be black. So this is 1/2 mil squared. So you need to be conscious of voltage drop when you're running power from a controller out to the valves. 1/2 mil squared will go 120 meters from the controller to the valve. So it's unlikely. I mean, you might be doing blocks bigger than that. Yeah. So, but residentially now in this area, there's not any blocks that are more than 100 meters. And I'm not saying for the whole block, like the controller is usually pretty central. So 100 meters in any one direction is generally safe.
Mount Barker is about 80 meters.
Yeah, and that's fine for 1/2 mil. Once you get above 120, you want to look at 1 mil, and then you can do 1.5 mil, or you go 1.5 mil with a 2.5 mil common. So commercially, on all the subdivision work we do, the cable that goes to the valve's 1.5 mil, and the common, being the black, is 2.5 mil. So I guess there's less voltage drops. You could run 0.5 K. So yeah, I won't spend too much time on that. Make sure that when you're doing your wire joins that you're using quality waterproof connections. So this is a gel filled connector. They work by putting the fittings, like you push the cable in there. So you're making sure that the cable goes past that point, and then crushing that.
Do you have to strip the...
You don't have to. I always did.
In the early days with the
smaller ones.
I did, and then it didn't work, and I had to strip them.
So the problem with
times.
stripping these, if you go back too far, you might find that copper sits outside of the wire join, and then that's exposed to water, and then that rusts, and you've got problems. These are designed, so those metal teeth there are designed that when you close it, they bite down between the plastic. And for what they're doing, that's enough of a connection.
Yeah.
So, but as everyone does, they make up their own rules. When I used to do it, I used to sheath these and these. So I'd pull that off.
Yeah.
I'd twist each connection together and shove it in one hole and close it.
Yeah.
Now, I would also make sure that none of the copper was like outside of the hole.
Gel,
The gel will, when you close it, it'll fill the rest of it.
Yeah.
So as long as it's all inside the gel. The idea being that any copper is protected from the elements so that it doesn't rust, and those joins will last forever.
Yeah.
You could solder them and heat shrink them if you really wanted to. Like, there's no...
Yeah. But joining cables,
Yep.
you just use them.
Yep.
Is there any other way to do it?
Nope.
No.
You can use DBYR joiners, which are a commercial grade joiner. That's half of it. They're ridiculous. They're like that big.
Okay.
They're rated to 600 volts and whatever else.
So you just twist the wires together.
You twist them in. So if you have a look, there's like a cone of teeth in there.
Oh yeah.
So when you twist the wires together, it actually grabs them and pulls them in and makes them like a ball in the bottom. The big thing with when you're doing wire joins is put them in a valve box and have them, make sure your client knows where they are and whatever.
Yeah.
You shouldn't need to join wire on site unless you broke it.
Run out of core or something.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'd recommend that you don't, if you've only got 30 metres and you need to run 50, go buy another roll and run your 50 and save your 30 for something else.
Yeah.
If you've broken it, obviously it's hard, you have to fix it, and you can use those joins and then put it in a little valve box, or let the client know that that's where it is.
Just take the shit out of it as well.
Yep, make sure it says, yep, or heat shrink. You can get heat shrink strips
Yeah.
and put them around it. These are the cutters that people would be using on site. They're a bit more commercial than those. They're, I guess, a residential cutter, but they're great. Like, if you're only doing a small job. The way these work, this blade's destroyed, as you can see.
Yeah.
Because these can cut PVC pipe, branches, copper, like that'll cut. Like that.
Right.
So, when you're doing PVC, you'll be twisting that. and then cutting it like that. And then you should be getting clean cuts like that. So that drip tube system we drew before will be a header pipe and a collection pipe. So when you're doing a drip, imagine that area is a drip lawn. You want a pipe that delivers the water and a pipe that catches the water, and this keeps your flow up. Pretend this is drip tube.
Okay.
So then we're cutting, I don't know if we've got any open drip tube. So we're cutting drip tube. Like, it obviously you don't want it to be curved like that. If you're doing this with 2 people, it's really easy to spool the drip tube off by walking backwards, and it'll come out relatively straight. Now, you can make that go like that 2 different ways. You can use a reducing T, like this. That's not the right size, but you can imagine a 25mm one of those. Or you can use these take-off adapters, these punch. I'll go get some. So they're a take-off adapter.
Right.
So the way they work is they'll get pushed into the pipe. Ooh, been off the tools for a while. So that, and Telco make these fittings out of a plastic. If you feel that barb, it's quite sharp. They say that you don't need clips on these, right? So that ain't coming out. Like, you would not, like, you can't get it out.
Right.
Now, we would still use clips. Like, if I was installing, I'd still use clips. For the pain of going back to a job site for one clip, it's just not worth it.
Right.
They also say that if it's at a certain pressure. So if you've got too much pressure, it might blow off. So you can put a plastic clip on, like that, and put it behind the barb.
Yeah.
Or you can use a metal clip, like that. And use a tool to close that. So these clips were used in vineyards a lot. And now they're used in landscaping a lot now. So that's never coming off. And that clip can be taken off and reused.
Oh, cool.
So we sell a lot of these now because people, I guess, high-end residential.
Plastic ones.
Well, they'll get brittle over time. It's probably triple the cost to buy a metal one. But these guys are putting in, I mean, some of the I don't know what you're charging for wet labour. You think about how much people are spending on their paving to pay an extra $60 for Cobra clamps and know that the irrigation is never, ever going anywhere. And they do it. So so these pipes will be pegged down. You punch a hole in them, like that, so it doesn't go through that side. A nice clean hole. And then that just goes in there. So that's, you can manifold like that, and they can swivel. So if you've got a circular or curved edge, you can point that in whatever direction you want. So do you want to have a shot? So you can try and see if you can get, I mean, it's going to be interesting. See if you can get that in there. Or you might be able to subcontract it. I struggled with it.
Yeah, in winter you need some WD-40.
Yeah.
Little tin, I just dip it and send the slide straight in.
Cup of hot water.
You're not going to give up, are you?
Hot water.
And okay,
There you go.
Almost.
That's why in summer, everyone wants to do irrigation in summer.
Yeah,
All the pipes
it's easy,
warm.
Because it's easy. Just don't hurt yourself.
Some bends, you just lie it out nice and straight. Although you do your sprinklers sometimes, and if you don't cover them up quick enough, by the end of the day, all your pipe
Definitely
stretch
do.
a couple of.
Synthetic tap's the same. Once you start laying synthetic, you've got to lay it early in the morning. As soon as sun starts touching it, it starts just falling.
Yeah.
That's right.
I almost punctured a hole in my hand.
Yeah. Oh, look, the same deal. So that's in. All right. So be careful. Don't puncture your hole in your hand with the next tool. So when you're punching with that, you want to try and make sure the pipe stays supported. You don't want it to go weird shapes, because if that holds an oval more than a circle, then it's not going to work. So that's the dangerous end. So
just push it in.
look, usually this will be pegged down, and you just stand above it and just do that.
Right.
It's obviously going to have more support around it because it's not like that.
Okay.
So you can do one. Yeah, there you go, that's it. And then I'll cut this off so you can feel all that luck to put that in. And then you push that in. So when I used to install, we'd get our header pipes down hard, like pegged down so that they're not moving, and then we'd run our laterals. Is that how you're doing it? Yeah. and that's it. So then
Okay.
you can go back afterwards and clip these if you wanted to, like that. When you're clipping that, you want to remember that the soil and the lawn's on top of this if it's in a lawn, or so if the clip sits up like that, it's going to be, I guess, at risk. So you want it to be down like that. I don't have any actual multi-grips here, so then you'd be just using pliers or multi-grips to close them off.
And is that it with these? You can't clip them open?
You can. So these will be same deal. You just pop that open. The problem with plastic clips is if you pop them open, you're going to be a chance. See, that can be reused.
Yeah.
If you try and do that with a Taiwanese clip or a Chinese clip, you could reuse. You do that with a brittle clip or a cheap clip, an import clip, you'll pop them. So there'd be some times where guys have gone out on to, like Victor Harbour and run out of clips and gone to Mitre 10 or whatever to buy more clips, and they've been a Chinese made clip.
Yeah.
Not that Chinese manufacturing is a problem, but the clips are softer, and then they're getting calls back and they're ringing us going, hey, your clips are blowing off, and we're like, not our clips.
Yeah.
And then they forget that, not you, but
Yeah.
they forget that they actually did go buy some clips from somewhere else and they were brittle. So if you want to have a shot at this one, have you used these?
No.
So you want to make sure you're behind that barb, and then these grab that bit there and that bit there and pull them together like that and undo like that.
So obviously made exactly for 13 mil and then like
Yep.
19
Oh, come on,
mil.
Clint. DK, you getting this? There you go. So then we've also got the 25 mil ones, and all the different sizes. So you could use a T for what we've just done, and push a T into a fitting, and put the 25 mil clamp like that. So you can do that one up if you want.